Welcome to Coffee Conversations. We have a very special episode coming to you today. It is Bob Dylan's birthday and he is turning 79. So I wanted to do something really cool for this. My name is Jen. I am your host. I'm with Shock City School of Music. And Bob Dylan is very special to me. So I wanted to just do something fun and just kind of hang out and chat about Bob Dylan. So I realized that I should probably find somebody that loves Bob Dylan as much as I do or more and that knows a lot about Bob Dylan. So conveniently enough, my business partner, Larry Rubin, with the school, is probably by far the biggest Bob Dylan fan that I will ever encounter. Maybe you will ever encounter as well. So I am going to be chatting with him and he's going to share with us some really cool stuff. So we're going to welcome on Larry. So again, welcome to our very special episode. Hi, Larry.
Hi, Jen. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me for Bob Dylan's 79th birthday.
Yeah, I was during the introduction.
Going on 100 if you've seen him recently.
Right. Well, during the introduction, I was saying that I couldn't think of anybody that is more knowledgeable and that loves Bob Dylan more than yourself. So I think you are the best person for this celebration for all things Bob Dylan.
Well, I'm happy to be here. And yeah, I do know a lot about Bob Dylan and have liked him for more years than I care to mention. So let's start talking about him.
Yeah, well, first, let's introduce you a little bit. So I mentioned that you are my business partner with Shock City School of Music. You are also an owner of Shock City Studios. So
That's
you've
right.
got both crossover. And also Shock City Podcast is the latest. Hi, Augustin. So thank you again for being here. And so we've got Bob Dylan behind me.
Right.
Do you want to take a guess of what year that picture is from?
That's from, I'd say, 1965 or 6.
You want to take another guess?
No, that's got to be
you
from
might.
65
Well, you might
or
be
6.
right. I could have. My information could be off. I think it's from 63, but again, I could be wrong. No, you think it's later?
I know it's later than that, Jen.
Okay.
I'll prove it to you.
Is it his hair?
His hair and the electric guitar, of course.
Well, sometimes the internet can lie. Oh, the electric guitar. That's a good hint. It's a Fender. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll take your word for it. So how long have you liked Bob Dylan and what was your original inspiration to liking him?
Well, when I was a young kid, let's say maybe 10 or 11 years old, I was like all the other kids. Back then, there was no satellite radio, no streaming, obviously. In fact, there was no FM radio. All the music we heard came through AM radio from KXOK, and they would play the top 40 hits. And back then, I'd listen to whatever they played on top 40, which was the Beatles, Beach Boys, those type of things. And it was kind of like the Beatles were, I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden in early 65, the song comes on the radio and it's like, goes on and on and on, all these words. It's like 6 minutes long. It's like a Rolling Stone.
Okay.
So I was, just a kid. I didn't know what all the words meant or anything, but it was intriguing and it was different than anything that I'd ever heard played on a top 40 radio station on my little AM transistor radio.
Oh, cool. And this was in 65?
This was 65, yeah.
Okay, nice.
So I bought the single, the 45 in those days. It's all the kids bought singles.
Right.
And I played it and I wore it out. And the flip side had a song called Gates of Eden, which was even weirder because it was kind of another classic Dylan song from that era that went on about 6 or 7 minutes and was acoustic and had all kinds of imagery and words, it was not meant for 10-year-old kids to be hearing.
Sure. Yeah.
So that was kind of my introduction. I didn't really buy a lot of albums at the time, and not till I was later in high school and early in college did I start to explore more into, I mean, I had heard by then, the popular Dylan songs, Blowing in the Wind and Times They Were Changing and all those things, but I really hadn't dug into a deep catalog, which by this time in the late 60s, early 70s, he had already come out with most of his classic material of the time.
Right.
So I started digging deeper into the catalog, and I was hooked from there forever. So.
Oh, cool. So do you know, when did he start, when did he come to New York and start his, I know he started kind of playing in some low-key places, and he learned a little bit from Woody Guthrie, right?
Yeah, he was, again, you can get all this in the history books, but he was a big Woody. He moved to New York, and he was kind of a Woody Guthrie fanatic, and he kind of became a Woody Guthrie, I won't say an imitator, but he was in that tradition of being like a folk type guy who he made up stories that he had hopped on freight trains and traveled the country, and he told everyone different stories, giving himself an exciting background when he was really just a guy from Minnesota who went to New York to try to make it as a folk singer in a folk explosion that was happening in the late 50s, early 60s.
So is that when he went to New York? So how many albums were out before you became exposed to Bob Dylan?
Question. Yeah, he was there in the early 60s, and he recorded a first album, I believe in 62, which was not a lot of, I think there was only one original song on it. The rest were covers of old folk type songs.
Okay.
62 later, he came out with the song that had, the album that had Blowing in the Wind on it. It's kind of funny. By the time I heard of him in 65, I was familiar with the song Blowing in the Wind, but I didn't put together that the same guy who was singing like a Rolling Stone wrote Blowing in the Wind. I thought
they're so different.
I thought Blowing in the Wind was just a traditional folk song. You'd heard it so much, and Peter, Paul, and Mary sang it.
Okay.
And I just figured no 21-year-old guy wrote that song. It's just something that's been around for forever.
Well, that was, wasn't that about Vietnam? Or is my timeline all off?
Your timeline's a little off. That was a little before Vietnam. I mean, we just got into Vietnam. But so he came out with that album, and then he came out with The Times They Were Changing, the next one in 63.
Okay.
By then he was a folk legend. Joan Baez had brought him on stage with her, and they became involved. And all the folkies who were looking for a new hero, he was like their spokesperson, and he was at the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. He went down south and a lot of things with racial inequality, and he played songs down there.
Okay.
And he was a folk hero before he was even known for being on the radio or anything.
Yeah.
But he didn't really want to be that. And he, that's when the story goes that he went electric in 65. Kind of all the folk people were booing him at his concerts. And there was a good movie with Robbie Robertson from the band, who was their backup band at the time, that they first went electric, or early on in that process, about how they went out on stage every night and they were booed just mercilessly. And the people who were supposedly real open-minded and in the folk tradition, being anti-prejudice and, those type of things. Now, all of a sudden, they were calling him Judas and saying that he sold out and all that, when he, as you see over the years, he was always doing that, always changing. And I feel kind of the same way. When he went through one phase, it's like, why is he doing this? Why is he singing these kind of songs? Why is he, all of a sudden he's, found Jesus and he's recording religious albums, and then he's recording old blues stuff. And so even though he's my favorite, he goes through different periods and changes. And I can't say I like all his music, but I went back and looked. I have 65 Dylan albums.
Wow. Are those, what format are those? CDs, vinyl?
They're all CD. I have them in vinyl, and then when CDs started coming out, I've got them in CDs.
Oh, wow. So you've got both?
So I've got both up till
amazing.
the point when CDs came out, I stopped buying the vinyl. So everything before 88 or whatever I have in vinyl and CD.
Wow.
My favorite period, which is kind of the most incredible period, I think, in modern music history, is from 65 to 66. Within about a year and a half period, he came out with 3 albums that are probably in the top 10 albums of all time. And it's incredible that he wrote all those songs in such a short period of time.
And which albums are those?
Those are starting with Bringing It All Back Home, which was the first time he had a band with him. It has Subterranean Homesick Blues, Mr. Tambourine Man, as well as a bunch of others. Next was Highway 61 Revisited, which came out just 5 months later.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's quick.
And it had Like a Rolling Stone, Desolation Row, which is, like a 10-minute classic song, Ballad of a Thin Man, and just, I think Rolling Stone named it the top album of all time. And then he followed that up not 8 or 9 months later with Blonde on Blonde, which was like the first double album of its kind. And so we really had 4 albums out within a year.
Wow.
I would recommend anybody who's really interested in finding out about everything up to that period, how he transitioned from the folk scene to that, up to the time when he was touring with the Electric Band till he had a motorcycle accident that kind of put everything up to that point on halt. There's a 2 DVD collection that Martin Scorsese directed called No Direction Home, which is, I would say, the place to start if you're really interested in getting the history of how he came to be.
Okay, so it's pretty accurate historically?
It's pretty historically accurate. Okay. It's got some interesting interviews with Dylan in the later years describing how things were going on.
What year did that come out?
That came out not too long ago, within the last 5 or 6 years.
And that was, so there was a lot of covers done. Other well-known musicians covered Bob Dylan songs for the score, right? For the soundtrack?
Yeah, I think, no, that one had a lot of his soundtrack, had a lot of his early stuff, plus some unreleased versions.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of different cover type things. There's one real good one. I can't recall the name. It's a triple CD that all different artists from Miley Cyrus to Ozzy Osbourne are covering his songs. It's really interesting.
Okay, so that's something different. Okay.
That's something different, yeah.
That's why you're here as the expert and not me.
Yeah. Well,
I love Bob Dylan, but now I realize maybe I don't know enough about him.
Yeah, I think watching that No Direction Home would be a real good place to start, of course. And then there's a No Looking Back documentary, which has a lot of interesting footage from his English tour when he went over there in 65 and was Electric for the first time.
Okay.
It's got some things with him and John Lennon.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Riding in a taxi together, and Dylan and Donovan and Joan Baez backstage rehearsing new songs with each other. Amazing. So it's kind of a classic Dylan footage in there.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
And those are, I think, traditionally, those are like the classic Dylan period of time when his reputation was cemented. If he had not done anything after 66, he probably still would have been the greatest songwriter of all time.
Yeah.
And then he's added another 50-something years to that. Wow. So, yeah.
So, what was the first concert that you saw? What year? I know that you've seen a lot of concerts, and we'll get into how many later, but what was the first year?
The first year I saw him, I remember I was just 10, 11 years old when all this was going on. And my parents probably wouldn't let me go to a concert even if I knew to go to a concert.
Yeah.
But, and he took, after his motorcycle accident, he kind of holed up in Woodstock and didn't really perform or go on tour from that time in 66 all the way to 74. He made some one-off appearances like at the Concert for Bangladesh and Isle of Wight concert and a couple of those type appearances, but he didn't really go on a tour that the public could see in their city till then. So by then I was old enough. I was in college, and he had the band, was his backup band.
Okay.
And so the band, they played at the old Checker Dome, which then became the Arena. So that was the first time I saw him. The first time I saw him in 74.
Oh, wow.
Was with the band, and that live album Before the Flood documented that tour.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, yeah, I don't really remember much about it to really comment on anything.
Okay.
But that was the first time I saw him.
And then I'm assuming the last year you saw him was 19, given your shirt.
My shirt is actually, I can talk about in a little while. My shirt is from a symposium I went to last year. I did see him, I think he played at the Fox last year.
And you went to that?
I went to, I've seen him every time he's come to St. Louis.
So that was in St. Louis. So how many times just in St. Louis have you seen him, do you think?
I think I've seen him, I'm trying to estimate, maybe 30 times.
Just in St. Louis or altogether?
Just in St. Louis. I've only seen him out of town 2 or 3 times.
Oh, okay.
I saw him at the original Farm Aid concert back in 83, I think. I saw him in Chicago once when I just happened to be there.
Okay.
But I haven't really, I'm not like a Grateful Dead deadhead touring with him or anything.
You're not a groupie?
I'm not that kind of fanatic. In fact, I've seen him 30 times, and I don't think I've ever gone to one show that I've said that was among the greatest shows I've ever seen. I hate to say.
Okay.
I love his music. I love him as a songwriter. I even like his singing for the most part up till recently when his voice is kind of gone. People would always say he can't sing, but
it's not his greatest attribute, but
yeah. His voice is different, and he's not an opera singer, or he doesn't have a traditional voice, but he can carry a tune and he can sing his songs like nobody else can sing them. So, but somehow, you've probably read, if you know anything about Dylan at all, in concert he changes things around. He's been on tour nonstop for like the last 30 years.
So I guess somebody could get
nonstop. bored out of playing the same songs over and over.
Yeah.
He changes things around, which,
he kind of jams out a little bit too.
Yeah, it's hard to read some of this. He changes the tempo, he doesn't really change the lyrics much, but he changes the tempo and the melody and the inflections. And sometimes you're at a concert and it's like, takes you a couple minutes to figure out what song it is, even though it's like a song you've heard a million times before. Right. And to me, that's a little...
Has it always been like that, or just more recently? Because I know
recently, but it actually, he was kind of slipping into that all along. Again, I would suggest if you want to, I wish I was old enough, some of the footage that's in that DVD, and either of those 2 DVDs that I just mentioned, showing him in the 60s, either playing acoustic, it's unbelievable, just him and the guitar playing these songs, or playing with the band. He was a great live performer and really, tremendous. since then, I guess I haven't really, if I would have been old enough to see him at those concerts, I probably would have said, this is the greatest concert I've ever seen. But
Okay.
I've never been able to say that. I mean, as opposed to if you go to a Springsteen concert and you like Springsteen, you'll come away just saying that was incredible.
I think the energy is just different. I've seen Springsteen one time. That was in 2009. And I've seen Bob Dylan maybe 4 times. I think the first time was probably 2005, so it was kind of recently. And had kind of the same experience you're talking about, where it was really hard to decipher what was going on.
Yeah. The thing you got to kind of watch out, there's so many people who idolize him beyond, I mean, I would say I don't idolize him. I just love his music and that, but it's not like he's Dylan, he can do no wrong. A lot of people have that attitude.
Right,
and I go to a show and I see it and I go,
Well, the tickets are so expensive. Like, you want to have a good concert experience, and it.
But then I read a review
hard.
of the same show I just sat through, and they say Dylan's on top of his game. It's the greatest performance. Blah blah blah.
Oh, they're too kind.
They're too. Yeah, they just are falling under the Dylan idol.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's putting on a great show, and he has. But seeing him now versus even 20, 30, 40 years ago is going to be a different experience.
Yeah. But the thing is, the thing that I kind of do admire about him is that he's, well, we know it's his birthday today and he's 79. You think of his contemporaries and none of them are putting out meaningful music right now. I mean, I don't like everything that he does, but in the last 10, 15 years, he's still writing new, creative, interesting music. His voice is totally froggy, and it's not even compared to what it used to be. It's not there anymore. But he's writing songs that are still good and still interesting. They're not like his classic stuff, but you can't say that Paul McCartney or the Rolling Stones or any of those people are really, in my mind anyway, writing anything that's comparable to their best stuff.
Well, it's not comparable. I mean, I can't comment on the Rolling Stones, but I know Paul McCartney is still putting out music, and
he might be the only one.
It's more poppy, and he actually composed a symphony, so I give him credit for that.
Yeah.
And then prior to Tom Petty's death, he still had some albums that were pretty good.
Tom Petty was one of the few who continued. And now, of course,
but he was younger, and
he's 10 years younger than Dylan, and he's kind of
he's very vibrant. Very energetic, a little bit different feel.
But I've seen, speaking of Tom Petty, I've seen some good tours going back to the tours with Dylan. He played with Tom Petty as his backing band. He played with the Grateful Dead as his backing band.
Okay.
The band, obviously. He shared the bill with Paul Simon and Willie Nelson. And so I've seen some really interesting collaborations and things that have made for some memorable concerts, even if
sounds like, so you saw all of those that you just mentioned?
Yeah, I saw all of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So, but I guess one thing along the lines I thought was interesting that I saw an interview with him recently, and somebody said, he wrote all this classic material in the 60s. And over the years since then, I mean, if he had never written the 60s material, he's written enough good stuff after his heyday, after his prime, so to speak, that he still would have been the greatest songwriter, even for his, what you would consider not his best work. He's still got a ton of great stuff. But somebody asked him, like, Bob, your new stuff's good, but it's not like a Rolling Stone or Desolation Row or Mr. Tambourine Man. Why can't you write a song like that anymore? Which is kind of a nervy question. And Dylan he didn't really get perturbed, but he said, you don't understand what it's like to be an artist. He goes, you have inspiration that comes to you, and you can't create inspiration if it's not there. you're in a certain time and a place in your life, and certain things come to you. And some of my songs just kind of came through me. I don't even know how I got them. So I can't just go out and say, I'm going to write a song just like that again. He goes, that's not how an artist works. An artist works on when he has the feeling or whatever. So he said, the question has no answer to it. I can't tell you why I couldn't write another song like that. It's because I'm not in that time and place in my life.
Yeah, and I don't even know how well it would be received. It's like nobody's writing music like that.
Right.
It's just that.
So I thought that was kind of an
back
interesting.
That's its own genre. Like I just, everything become morphs into something else. So he could write something that's great right now, presently, but I don't think anyone's really. I mean, you could obviously recreate that style of the classic rock and all of that, but it just wouldn't be the same.
I mean, he wrote a song a few years ago that Adele covered and had a big hit with it. That to me, it was just a throwaway song on a Dylan album, but she turned it into a hit. So your point's kind of right. If you write something that gets performed in a way that people are used to hearing a modern song, you can still have some popularity. But
yeah, I don't know. What I always love about him is, I mean, this isn't an original thought. This is very common knowledge for Bob Dylan, but how poetic he is. He loves poetry, and the lyrics are very substantial in his music. So to me, that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy his music. It's not really about there being an elaborate, elaborate instruments or different things like that. I mean, obviously his band is great, and all of that has been written very well, but it's more about what he's singing about and the inflection and the feeling behind it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's so
I mean, his voice, it doesn't have to be great because he's singing very passionately about what he's feeling and thinking. And so I think that's the main thing about him that's so wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, you're right that the basic, from a musician background, which you obviously have, most of his songs are not complicated. They're either based on simple folk or blues progressions, simple verses, choruses, bridges. There's nothing real complicated. In fact, a lot of them are kind of repetitive, just verses and with a ton of lyrics thrown in there. But you're right. It's at the time. Again, you've read about it, but you're a little young. At the time when why he's so influential is before him, pop songs were all about moon and June and sky and being in love and like that. And the fact that he became popular pretty much pushed the Beatles to change beyond what they were.
Be a little bit more rugged.
You read a lot of you read John Lennon's biography, and he was they almost had like a competitive thing going, like, well, if Dylan pushed John Lennon to another level, but then when Dylan saw how popular the Beatles were, it encouraged him to go over to England and examine getting his music to a wider audience through being more of a rock-based performer, which he was. Evidently in high school, he wanted to be Little Richard when he grew up, and he was a rock and roller before he kind of moved to New York and got caught up in the folk scene. So it's not like he ever really sold out and became electric. That's just kind of the the title they put on him.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm always glad to see someone younger than me who appreciates Dylan for, rather than just saying
a lot of people do. When I was in college, I took a poetry class, and one of the things we studied was Bob Dylan lyrics. And I thought that was really cool, of course, because there's the music tie-in. My professor, he was really cool. I think this was at Lindenwood. But he just talked about what poets influenced Dylan and things like that. And
interesting.
So yeah, I mean, that was just kind of neat. But no, I've always liked Dylan. Maybe it's your fault.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I mean, I
Well,
appreciate good music. I also love the Beatles, and classic rock is kind of my thing. So
yeah, well,
I mean, that's why we're doing this Bob Dylan special. I wouldn't just cover anybody's birthday.
Right. Well, there's a lot of room. I'm not saying because Dylan's my favorite, I don't love the Beatles or
Is he your number one favorite of all?
I'd say he's my number one favorite of all. Just, again, if I had to, there's certain of his albums and things I could just throw away or throw into the fireplace and I'd be, I wouldn't care. I mean, everything he's done, I'm not crazy about, but
you don't
it's
have
just
to be,
just his best stuff and the magnitude of great stuff is, somebody there?
It's the dog. Oh. I saw her because of how my lighting is. I started seeing a shadow behind me, and it was the dog. She's that's Shastia. She just
I know Shastia. So
stood up and lay back down.
But anyway, as far as just the influence he had, I think it's nice that another generation of people picks up on the fact that it's hard to relate to the influence unless you were around at the time. That listening back to music that came out, unlike anything that's come out before that, you can hear it in a lot of music nowadays. Anytime you hear lyrics that are interesting or poetic or that, I mean, you can almost trace it back. I don't know if you could say it wouldn't have happened if Dylan wasn't around, but
no, he definitely hit that. I mean, I feel like there's and this just could be my opinion. I think everybody has different influencers when it comes to music, but for me, it seems like there was this small window of time between 60s and 70s that all of those musicians were doing really cool things that have, they pushed the limits of music at the time. And it was just this really cool decade for music. And there's been nothing that has even come close to it. I mean, the 80s were okay. It's not my favorite decade for music, but it just wasn't the same. Yeah, it was very rock and roll. Things started becoming a little bit more electric, but 60s and 70s really kind of introduced and paved the way for all of that. Yeah. And I don't listen
I'm with you, but
I don't listen to a lot of pop music at all. I don't care for modern music. I'd rather, I think what people were doing before, when all they had was a guitar and their voice and they're just creating music, they didn't have a lot of resources. They didn't have a lot. And, they're just sitting on their back porch or whatever, creating a song, and that was it. And it was all original because now everything is so oversaturated. It's like, well, it's all kind of the same and this led to this and whatever. So yeah, I just kind of hold all of that very dear to me because it just seems very, again, original and organic and very raw. So I think that's a very, it's a very important time in music history. So, and the music's awesome. It's the best.
I agree with you, but if I agree with you, I sound like an old fogey. So if you
lived through it. I'm jealous. I didn't live through any of it. I see Bob Dylan when he's performing when he's in his 70s. It's not the same.
No, it's not the same. Yeah, those years between when if you look at Dylan and the Beatles, the years the Beatles went from I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You, Yeah, 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 to within a couple years, Sgt. Pepper's and the White Album and all those things.
Yellow Submarine.
It's the same year as Dylan was going from, Blowing in the Wind to, all these other things that came 2 years later.
Right.
And those years were the years that, in my mind, were like the launching pad for music as it evolved. And so, in fact, I got a couple albums that
let's see those.
These are some signed Dylan albums. I didn't get them signed from him. I've never met the man. And actually, sometimes you always meet people that you want to meet people that are that you idolize or you respect. Or I'm not sure I want to meet him because
I think it might taint something.
I think it might because
Yeah.
I've heard he's pretty grumpy and pretty grouchy and pretty unfriendly. And
I think I would be too if I was having to travel and do the same thing like that for 50 years. I don't blame the man.
But in 1964, times they were changing.
Wow.
Here's what he looked like. He looked like Woody Guthrie, like an old folk singer from the Dust Bowl. And then a mere 2 to 3 years later, when he was
incredible,
he was like this.
Wow, and that one's signed too. Cool.
Yeah, that's Blonde on Blonde cover.
Yep, that's a classic.
That's a classic, and that's the best look, I think.
The hair.
The hair, and I mean, that's he went from being a Dust Bowl folk singer to a
and
rock
what
star.
was the time difference between the two albums?
3 years. And
my gosh, he really it looks like he was eating a little bit better too. He put on some weight. He looks healthy.
And in between, he there were 1, 2, 3. There were 3 albums in between in that 3-year period. So he was basically coming out with an album every year of classic stuff. So within 4 years he wrote probably 60 classic songs.
Wow. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
All right. So last year you went to the symposium.
Yes.
So, but I'm sure you knew a lot of this good information before that. So, what were some of the highlights of the Bob Dylan Symposium? And
I'll tell you a little about that.
How did you manage to have that experience?
It was quite an experience for a Dylan fan. Last year in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I can't remember the connection, but there's some connection with someone in the Dylan family or something. They're having a Dylan archive at the Woody Guthrie Museum is there, and they're setting up a Dylan archive museum that will have a bunch of collectibles and everything. And to kind of kick off the funding of that, they had a 4-day symposium, which is basically, I mean, I thought I was like a pretty knowledgeable Dylan fan.
Yeah.
People came from all over the world. There were people there from Europe.
Oh, my goodness.
It was basically 4 days of like a classroom setting where you could pick which sessions you want to go to.
Okay.
And the people there were maybe like your college professor. They were mostly academic people who were analyzing and, in my mind, overanalyzing.
Right.
I brought the program from that is The World of Bob Dylan.
Look at that hair in that picture.
Yeah, and that was probably...
Is that the 80s?
Maybe the 80s or late 70s.
My goodness.
But they analyze things. Sometimes you hear it and you go, that's a cool song, and you don't get too much into it. Some of the sessions were Blood on the Tracks through the lens of the liberal arts, interdisciplinary explorations of consciousness and authenticity in Bob Dylan's artistic process. Then you've got Bob Dylan's gentle and agnosticism, every grain of sand in the defense of objective truth. So that's kind of the...
kind of all over.
It was like, a lot of it were like literature professors comparing him to famous poets and picking things out.
Wow.
So some of them, I had a tendency to say, hey, he was just writing a rock song and he rhymed the 2 words together because they went together or it sounded good.
Yeah, it's
sometimes they overanalyzed a lot. It's
like psychological analysis. I think it's like he probably wasn't thinking too much about it. It just came out.
At one point, I remember an interview with him. He said, "Hey, stop all this. I'm not a spokesman. I'm just a song and dance man. And if you like what I do, that's fine. But I'm not a spokesman for a generation. I never intended to be." So
yeah, he seems pretty private. Like he's not looking for all the fame and the spotlight.
On the other hand, then he does commercials. He's kind of an enigma which is kind of, he does commercials. He has his own brand of whiskey. He does all these things that you think, he's kind of a recluse, and yet isn't interested in commercialism. But then he's never shied away from trying to make $1 by using his name either. So
yeah, well, it's probably easier work than going on tour.
Yeah, I guess.
So, I don't know. I don't know that I would have the energy for that at that age.
But there was a 4-day symposium.
Wow. It's really cool. And that's in Oklahoma. And so they're setting up this whole Bob Dylan thing within the Woody Guthrie Museum.
Not within it, but as a companion. I mean, it was the Woody Guthrie was from Oklahoma. Okay. So somehow there's a connection why it ended up in Tulsa. So it's an archive type of thing.
Oh, cool.
And I'm not sure if it slowed that. It was just starting out to the process of collecting.
Oh, that's really cool. And that's a permanent. That's a permanent thing. It's not like a moving.
Yeah. Okay. Right. It was supposed to be. I'm not sure if it's been put on hold with everything going on. But,
right.
But yeah, I thought I knew a little bit about Dylan, and I'm not like I read books and I read magazines, but it's not like my life revolves around trying to be a Dylanologist or something. But these
is that
people,
an official term?
I think it's an official term.
Wow.
But,
okay.
But it's like if you ask one of these people at this symposium, and there were hundreds of people there, like I said, from all over.
Wow.
And if you said, like, when's the last time you played It's All Over Now, Baby Blue? Somebody would say, oh, that was April 15th, 1987 in Buffalo. It's like, what? You've got too much time on your hands.
Clearly.
Yeah. So anyway, it was an interesting 4 days.
That is really
I'm
cool.
glad I went. Yeah.
Wow.
And yeah. So what else do you need to know?
I don't know. So what is I don't even know this. Maybe you know. But when is the next Bob Dylan tour? Is he touring? Obviously, there's no tours, but like, right. Is he supposed to be currently touring?
He was on tour.
He was, okay. Does he have any newer albums, or when's the last album
he
wrote?
He just released 2 songs. One of them is 17 minutes long.
Okay.
And it's about John Kennedy's assassination. It starts out that way, but then it goes through history of music and pop culture for the 60 years since that happened.
Wow.
17 minutes long, and it became his first #1 single of all time. And I guess now people were stuck at home and they downloaded it or streamed it or whatever.
That went right over my head. I didn't catch wind of that at all.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. He released another one, another single the week after that. But he's got an album coming out next month.
Okay. Do you know what it's called?
So he's...
I'm sure you've got it on pre-order.
I've got it on pre-order. I can't remember the exact name. The songs are, again, 17 minutes long.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's not very tuneful. It's just kind of it's almost like him reading.
Is it more political? This kind of reminds me, and I might be imagining the completely wrong thing, but it kind of reminds me of Neil Young's album Living with War. Is it kind of like that?
It's not as overtly. I mean, Neil Young usually wears his heart on his sleeve, and there's no doubt where he, which I like that album a lot, Living with War. But no, this is more, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of, you haven't heard anything like this, so you just kind of, it's not really overtly political, but
it's not as like musical.
It's not very musical. It just kind of has some.
Is he more talking versus singing? Is that kind of the vibe?
It's kind of him reading a long 17-minute poem. So hold on, I'll tell you in a minute. It's called "Murder Most Foul." It's called. Okay. And then his other song that he released. Both of these are going to be on an upcoming CD that's being released next month.
Cool. We'll have to look out for that.
The other one's called "I Contain Multitudes."
Oh.
So.
I mean, as usual, he's got very abstract and purposeful words.
Yeah, both songs are interesting.
Okay.
I wouldn't put them up in my favorites on the first listening, it's pretty hard to have too many listenings at 17 minutes. You wouldn't have much time left in the day if you listen to it too much.
Well, everyone's listening to us for like an hour or so.
Oh, we've been going for an hour?
Almost.
Oh, we have. Oh.
See how easy this is?
Yeah. Just like if I drank coffee, it would be just like a coffee conversation.
You don't even drink coffee, though.
No, I don't.
I'm afraid to see what would happen.
Yeah. So, have I answered all your Bob Dylan questions? I think
so, unless there's anything like super cool you'd like to share, any last minute Bob Dylan favorite things. But no, I think this is really cool. It's, I think we've covered. It's kind of cool to cover something different. I've been doing a lot of podcasts here lately with jazz musicians and stuff. So this kind of is, I love jazz, but this is more my cup of tea. Yeah,
I'm glad you asked me to do it. It's been
very cool.
Fun and interesting. I'm glad I could maybe share some knowledge to somebody who likes Dylan but didn't know
well,
some
I learned
of the background.
A lot. Yeah. And his original name is?
Robert Allen Zimmerman.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, from Minnesota.
Yep.
Hibbing or St. Paul.
And
St. Paul, by the way,
didn't he, and this could have been just one of his fabricated stories, but he did hop a train. No, he didn't?
I think that was a fabrication from what I understand.
Okay.
He went to the University of Minnesota and then dropped out after
So then how did he get from there to New York?
I don't know if he took a
regular train.
I don't know that he hopped a train.
He bought a ticket and had a passenger seat.
Maybe he actually did hop on it. Maybe that's what he meant by hopping.
Gotcha. Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But he didn't lead the life of a hobo like he pretended.
Well, maybe I'll have to reread some of my stuff. I've got some books set up here.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
I might need this Dylan 100 Songs and Pictures book is really cool. The first half of the book is actually the music and the score of his songs, which is kind of neat. So if you wanted to like sit down at the piano or on the guitar or whatever and play, you could. And then, of course, you've seen the Bob Dylan scrapbook.
Yes.
56 to 66. And then I've got a couple of magazines. But yeah, I guess I'm due for a new Bob Dylan book.
Yeah. Well, Chronicles is the one that he wrote like an autobiography.
You know what? I think I do have that. I've got are there 2 volumes?
Yeah, I think there's only 1 volume, but he may have called it volume 1.
Okay, well then you know what? I do have that. I think it's in my Beatles cabinet for some reason, or I don't know where it's at.
I would suggest reading that, but that's traditional. That's like a Dylan song.
But it's been a while since I've read it. It's just, that stuff kind of escapes you over time. Well, maybe not for you, but I don't have as good of a memory, so.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Well, thanks for being here. Happy birthday to Bob Dylan, 79.
Yes, 79, and hopefully he'll be out on tour, and we'll wait for the new CD next month.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, have a good one.
Thank you, Jen.
All right. Bye. All right. So that was Mr. Larry Rubin, and he was our special guest for our special episode, All Things Bob Dylan, for Bob Dylan's birthday episode, again, turning 79. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. This episode will be available on our podcast site. We are hosting on Anchor, so you can find us there. And then you can also listen on all of the main podcast platforms. And also be sure to subscribe and follow on YouTube. So we will be posting the video segment there on YouTube as well. So you can see the live interaction and all of that fun stuff. We are looking for some sponsors as well. So if you are interested in sponsoring our podcast, we would love to brag about you if you're a musician and would love to share something. So be sure to get a hold of us if that's something that might interest you. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. You can find us online at shockcityschool.com. And thanks for being here.